Welcome, 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 everyone, to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. This is episode 12. With you today is your typical host, Ryan, and I've also got Mark with us today. How you doing, buddy?
Not too bad. How you been?
I'm doing all right. It has been a stressful set of weeks and months. This year is clearly not panning out the way a lot of people intended, and that's kind of what's influenced this episode that we're gonna do. It's a topic we're both very interested in, and related to video games, I think there's a lot to say. And you brought the idea to me about talking about this based on those conversations. So you've actually asked to lead this episode today, and we've done some extra prep for this. So Mark, why don't you tell me and our viewers about the discussion we're going to have today?
Sure. Yeah, this is something that's been floating around for a little bit of time now. We just kind of wanted to make sure everything was all the T's were crossed, I's were dotted, kind of thing. This is a little bit of a different episode than what we've been doing, what we've been playing and whatnot, but it is very relevant and related to video games. It's not so much the elephant in the room, but it's more or less a topic that I guess hits home more so during the time of quarantine. Essentially, are video games good or bad? More so, kind of addiction, talking about mental health. So, again, we are not experts in any way. We are gamers. We're obviously a little bit biased towards that. But yeah, wanted to talk about this a little bit in detail. So, want to put that question back over to you, Ryan. What is your initial thought when someone asks you, or maybe if you overhear somebody talking, and whether or not video games are good or bad?
That's the most loaded version of the question, and that's not a criticism of you asking the question because I know it's deliberate.
It's a common one.
Right. It's so reductive, and that's what we're going to get into today, and that's why this is such a fascinating conversation and why we were looking forward to having it is because if I had to answer whether or not video games are good or bad and just face value that question, I'm going to say video games are good. And we're going to get into why that is and why there's this separation and where some of that stigma comes from. But I would say, yeah, video games are definitely good, and there's a lot of reasons and scientifically backed reasons. And that's part of what we did before is we looked up articles and information to try to have more informed opinions on it on
Yeah.
top of just all the anecdotal evidence we've read from all the video game websites, all the magazines and things. And it's obviously been a topic of pop culture since the 90s with the invention of the ESRB and video games being primarily marketed to kids, thanks to like Mortal Kombat and another video game that got that and talking about what should we do. And of course, parents have been saying like, oh, don't spend too much time in front of the TV because
Oh,
you're
yes.
gonna go blind or things. And we
Yeah.
found
Well,
talking points and all that.
I think not only video games too, and I think that's an important initial gut check too. It's not simply video games. It's always, I mean, back even before we were kids, it was smoking and sort of cartoon characters being promoted on that scale. But we're not necessarily going down that road today. It's more or less just about kind of how video games have kind of positioned our lives, and curious to kind of put that question back over to you, and over the so many decades now that you've played video games, and I'm not looking to throw you under the bus with an age, but what would you say is kind of like your primary, most positive piece that you get away from video games?
The most positive aspect of video games for me has been socializing. And it's funny
Hmm.
because it didn't necessarily start out that way, but that is speaks to the nuance of the conversation where culturally video games were stigmatized. And I was definitely into video games more than the people around me, but there's
Hmm.
the more casual gaming audience, and I don't say that as derogatory, it's just as a matter of recognizing the pattern. There's the people who will just play like Call of Duty or just play the sports games, whether that's FIFA, Madden, NHL, or a mix of those, and they get, maybe 2 or 3 games a year, and that's all they're really interested in. And that's kind of the casual thing. Or they play with a couple friends and they rent a game or they experiment just a little bit, but they don't get invested in the industry, they don't get invested in the culture, they don't know about every single indie game that's coming out or whatnot. They only see what's advertised on TV. And so early on, video games didn't really help me do that. And then as more people and kids started getting video games and started playing it and it became cool to like video games, I found a core group of friends that were nerdy like me. We were not into video games at a similar level and enjoyed sharing that information. And then slowly it helped bring me around those people and find those people. And then I've now got my core groups of friends because I've got a couple groups. And it kind of all starts with
Couple of
that
friends,
bond.
right?
Yeah. And now like you and I and Mike and Ed and Paul, like we get online and we'll play video games. Or back before COVID, we were, hanging out regularly and playing both local co-op and chatting about stuff. And that's, that's what's been going on. Now video games are a digital activity that we do for socializing. And of course,
And
we can expand on that later and how how other people
yeah,
use it for socializing.
you had an interesting keyword there, online. Is that one thing going back to sort of how you were talking earlier about there wasn't as much social interaction amongst your friends early on? Was it mostly because of back when original Nintendo, Sega, these were all local co-op only?
I had a few friends where we would get together and hang out, and then we would play like Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64. And Nintendo 64, I think, was like one of those big jumping off points because of the four controller ports and explosion of split screen gaming thanks to that, and eventually Dreamcast carried it on a little bit, PS2, etc. So online definitely helps because it makes it
Yeah.
more convenient, but definitely it's the people. I had to find the people first who are interested and open to playing games. And then you get that comfort level just like you do with any other friendship, and then you start hanging out, and whether that would be you'd go outside, go for a walk, go to the movies,
Mhm.
hang out, get the guys together to play some ball out in the yard, things like that. It's more like you find the people first, then you learn what you're willing to do. So I was more interested in gaming, but then I found the people who were interested in gaming, and then I started hanging out locally, and online just kind of enhanced and carried that relationship forward into, I guess you could call like the new generation or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually very interesting. And like talking about social interaction, having consoles without an internet connection, I actually don't think I really played very many games at all with my friends growing up. I mean, I'm really trying to kind of dig through the archive there. Like, how many, like, I also had a lot of friends that actually wound up moving out of my hometown relatively early on before I even, I think, turned like 12 years old, some of which I still stay in contact with. But I also grew up with 3 other siblings, so that also was easier. So
Yeah.
technically, I was still playing video games with my brothers. But yeah, I don't think it was actually really until probably high school or even college when I had a couple of roommates and we were sitting down playing FIFA or whatever and meeting people from all across the state or country, for that social interaction. And then of course, I know I've talked about this before, but really modern day now, not only is that what we're doing during the pandemic, but just even before that, that's how I basically sort of quote unquote hang out and sort of see a bit of my family, my siblings especially, is through video games. So I think social interaction by far I think is number one, but there are also other positives. And would you say like kind of reading through and just looking at this, from my lens, and I'm sure you were doing this from your side as well, but decision making, team building, like there are other added benefits. I wouldn't say that I necessarily am so different at work because I play video games, but maybe subconsciously I am as far as interacting with other people and sort of building a team. Is that something that you've ever felt has any kind of weight for you?
Before I answer that, I do just want to harken back for some of our newer listeners we may have that some of our stories related to social experiences with video games that harkens back to what we were talking about in episode 2 where we shared some positive gaming moments and stories like that, and that really touches on what we delved into there about the social aspect. So if anyone's
Are you
looking for
giving
more,
are you
huh?
giving a self plug there?
Oh yeah, we're allowed to plug ourselves on our own podcast.
I
So
kid, I kid.
yeah, so if people want to hear some more stories there about the social aspects and not necessarily the scientific stuff we're going to get into, you can go back and listen to episode 2. But to answer your question now, when it comes to skills, real world skills, I think video games have helped or enhanced. I think it's my problem solving. I've kind of always been more intellectually driven, so I like to solve problems, and that's kind of been taught to me. And I think with video games, and this is something I've also read that there have been scientific studies on, where when you play certain types of video games or video games in general, it does help energize those parts of your brain that are about problem solving and learning to think outside the box and trying to keep your brain flexible. And they talk about that. There's like the game Brain Age that was on Nintendo DS, or even playing like little games like Sudoku or crossword puzzles that just make your brain flex those centers. It helps with other tasks and translates because that's just our brain is like a muscle in terms of that. So with other different experiences and situations. So while video games do also have a bunch of patterns, but that gives you experience in learning new types of patterns. And anytime video games really shake things up or make you think sideways, that will then translate to other real world things where, well, what's going to be most effective for taking care of the situation in now? And that's both helped me. Now I'm also kind of an artistic person, so I think it all kind of circular feeds into me being able to be more creative. At the same time, it's also, and this is something I've kind of refined over the years, is learning how to think efficiently as well, be creative to the goal of efficiency. So I can solve a problem as quickly as possible, as well as make it super effective. Because I don't like to revisit problems. You don't want to be fixing the
Yeah.
plumbing in your house and have to patch it every couple months. So what's like the most effective way to do this for the longest term solution at the lowest cost would be a practical example of that. And the kind of situations that video games put you in, or just playing video games in general, will help you be able to think outside the box for other things. So I think that's what gaming has done for me is really helped with my problem solving and just coming to understand and being able to think through situations.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you. So can you recall any situations where you kind of feel like you've had that moment where you realize you're like and there's the anecdotal example online, like, oh, playing Tetris with stacking boxes because you're moving. Have you ever caught yourself problem solving and then realize you kind of like, oh, I was kind of inspired by a video game to like this feels like I just solved the game problem.
I'm sure because we were chatting really quickly about Tetris earlier and like with the new game, but that's for another topic, another day. I'm absolutely sure it has happened. I can't think of a specific example off
Yeah.
the top of my head right now, but yeah, as far as problem solving and just kind of like looking at things from a different lens and just you're on a boat and the boat's sinking and there's a hole and you don't have anything around you except for a hammer and a brick of wood, like you're gonna figure it out and get that square peg in the round hole kind of situation. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it's something that I definitely believe has helped us all. And something else when you were talking about just some of the more puzzle solving games. I mean, there's so many games that include puzzles or have these types of tasks that or goals that you're set out to accomplish that aren't as black and white and clear as something else that's a puzzle. But at the end of the day, yeah, we're sort of solving, we're teaming up. I mean, even a first person shooter, you have 63 other people or 31 other people, I guess, in Battlefield that you're all looking to accomplish this goal together. And that's where I think it's the most powerful in like we're uniting together. Sure, there's a lot of games that things get a little muddy and it's the communities may be a little bit crazy in that sense. But overall, yeah, if we don't perform in such a way in like a first person shooter type game, you're going to lose and then you're going to feel bad about that and not be super happy.
To your point there with like the team management, so that can lead to like managerial type skills, and this is reinforced by the article I read, is that when you're playing those high action games and you're in those multiplayer settings where there's a bunch of things, it does help with your brain being able to manage multiple variables at once and be able to rotate around focuses. So that right there also, like, that's a in video games you're exercising that, but in a much more entertaining way. But just having that experience then translates over to real world managerial skills where you may have to multitask and be forced to balance multiple projects at your job.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that impacts me more so with my other line of work whenever I more or less referee soccer, but it's been a little while since I've done that. So that's for another time when we revisit that. Something else though, definitely because we physically have to press buttons and move our bodies in subtle ways. Cognitive behavior. That's something else that sort of came up, doing a little bit of navigating around. And would you say your hand-eye coordination is like above average or below average? I don't necessarily want to put you on the spot here, but kind of curious to hear where you personally feel like you land.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm pretty sure my hand-eye coordination is above average. Nothing's
Yeah.
more satisfying when you realize you've dropped something and you're able to catch it right away, either
Yes,
with the same hand or another hand?
100%. We haven't talked about this before, but I have the exact same experience where, open a fridge or I mean, I played sports quite a bit when I was growing up, so is it directly related from video games? Probably not. Where I haven't even seen something, but like my hand will just subconsciously go in that direction, grab something before it hits the ground. And there's been at least a handful of times where it's been like, I didn't even think that I had a chance to catch that. And I miraculously did it. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you have also.
Yeah, I'll share just two little stories. One I'll never forget because I got a compliment from a girl who was cute, so it stuck with me,
Ooh.
obviously. It was back in high school. At one point, we were all like leaving the classroom and we were passing a desk, and there was a stack of papers that was just on there, and
Yeah.
I forget if it was the person in front of me or something happened, but the paper, or it might have even been me. But either way, the papers were about to fall off the desk, and it was like, a big stack of like 30 to 50 sheets, and I managed to catch the sheets right as they were falling off before they went everywhere. So I caught the whole stack and I put it back up there, and the girl saw me like, "Wow, you were like a ninja there." And I was just like, I had the biggest grin on my face the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And then, of course, and this isn't to sound too risque, but I mean, we've all been there. I mean, I hope we're all keeping up with the hygiene. But you're in the middle of a shower, and you've got a bar of
Right.
soap, and
Oh, yeah.
just you're trying to have control of it, but it is a slippery thing. And every once in a while, it'll what slippery things will do. It slips out of your hands, and you're able to catch it again without dropping it, or you do that fun juggle where it's like and it
Yep.
just when you manage to actually catch it, it's
Yeah.
it's great because you don't want it falling on your toes. That's gonna hurt a lot.
Now, what
So
a catastrophic thing that would happen.
yeah,
And then God
anytime.
forbid if it, gets dented, you might as well just buy a new one, right?
Yeah, the soap's just not good anymore once it's dented. This is just
No.
facts.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I would say my hand-eye coordination is above average and based on stuff there, and definitely reaction timing. And I play like fighting games on top of occasionally multiplayer shooters, not so much, but I would say definitely above average. How do you feel about yours, and do you have any examples where you notice, or you were
Yeah,
saying like you noticed?
I definitely think I have above average as well, hand-eye coordination. I think a lot of that though, through soccer playing for 15 something years and,
Right?
and
Yeah.
a little bit of baseball as well. I'm sure that's helped out a lot more because how
But
many
you also
times
do
when I
mountain
was
biking too, right?
also do mountain biking, yeah, which certainly is, read and react. You're flying down the hill sometimes 20, 30 miles an hour and the boulder on one side, a root on the other. You got to navigate in those quick time periods. But yeah, it all sort of comes together for, yeah, I think better and improved cognitive
Yeah.
behavior.
And we're not saying necessarily that video games caused us to be good at those things. It's
Right.
more that video games reinforce these same are proven to reinforce these areas of our brain that we use in these other activities and vice versa. So I'm sure you're also better at playing games to some regard because of the skills you put in for mountain biking or playing soccer. And what was the other one you mentioned? Oh, I know you play tennis as well.
Tennis, baseball,
Yeah, baseball.
basketball years back. Yeah. There's
Yeah, I
been
must.
good chunk of them.
Yeah, I haven't really played organized sports, but all of those I've played volleyball. I'm really fond of, and you and I obviously have played a ton of table tennis slash ping pong, and that's a very fast paced
Oh
game.
yeah. Oh yeah. With a ball that's a little bit larger than the size of a quarter,
Hmm.
So hopefully we'll get back into that in 2021. So last thing, as far as kind of what I'm thinking about when it comes to positives and how can video games kind of improve our lives. Something I have, I would say, limited connection to is sort of help with depression. I think that's a big can of worms, so I don't want to spend too much time here if that's not something that you want to talk too much about. Is that something you have any experience in, or maybe you've had a tough time and video games has sort of boosted your self esteem and kept you motivated?
Yeah, definitely. I did go through some depression back when I was growing up in grade school and a little bit into college, and I did talk about this a bit on episode 2 as
Right.
well. So to kind of recap that, I was the nerdy kid. I liked the video games. I didn't really have too much trouble at home, though. My stepdad is not the best person in the world, so that is was feeding into that, and I didn't have much self-esteem with all of this stuff combined. So the way video games helped me, and I believe that it's helped a bunch of other people, and I've heard different stories because there are a lot of people who have gone through depression and have played video games, is that video games can be extremely helpful with that because they are interactive and hence can give you that sense of control you're lacking in
Absolutely.
reality. And that's something we all have to deal with, but we cope with it at different levels. Now, you can get that sort of reinforcement and experience elsewhere, like especially like organized sports, but it's different when you're doing something like an organized sports because as you know, like we'll just say soccer because I have the most experience understanding that from multiple friends playing soccer. With organized sports, like there is it's real people, it's real life, it's teams. You're not necessarily going to always win. The game is not designed for you to win. You're designed to play the game and you win or lose based on how good you and your team are. Whereas with video games, they're more inclined to designed to let the player win, or they want the player to win, but they also provide a challenge. So it's almost like the training wheels of like I'd say helping with dealing with the first steps to like dealing with depression
Yeah.
is the way I describe it because you need something that just starts to build your confidence and I think a lot of that with dealing with depression is first building up those parts of your brain that will let you get to a healthier spot. Depression isn't something I believe that you can fully cure. Some people I think really do get maybe fully better, but it definitely can be an ongoing illness for other people. And life's just difficult. So it's not something
Yeah.
that ever the challenge that can come that presents that can cause depression symptoms never really go away. But
Yeah.
having video games be able to sort of give you a challenge but are still designed to let you overcome or have solutions, it starts training your brain to overcome that adversity, and that can lead to getting through that. Or the other side of it is just simply you need a distraction, and giving your mind a chance to just relax and not deal with the stress can be just as therapeutic as, like as I mentioned before, learning how to start problem solving and be able to become constructive in your thinking so you get out of those depressive patterns.
Yeah. It's it's certainly a challenge. I think it's amazing and incredible to kind of be able to just turn on a console. Actually, never mind. Something that I personally have been kind of sort of feeling and going through sort of pandemic. A lot of us sort of feel trapped. I definitely feel somewhat that way. We're trying to make the best of it. We can only do what we can do, mostly at home during all of this. But days after work, or so many times after work, I have just booted up Red Dead Redemption and just ridden around on the horse, gone fishing. And it's so chill, it's so casual. Like there's not a whole lot of violence, and I've noticed that it's just relaxing me. And not that I'm like extremely stressed at work or anything to that extent. It's something to kind of just tune out, I guess, the other chaos that's happening. And I think that's something that we can all do by just turning on a console, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree on that point. It is nice because the problems in the real world are so big and don't really have clear answers, nor do we as individuals have as much agency as we'd like. And that's where we can kind of go to video games. And I understand the word escapism. I don't like to use it too much because I think it gets used against people too much as a derogatory. Whereas that's what I think is the therapy is being able to go into a space, even if it's digital, like video games, and you just know, like, I can solve a few problems. Like I can go in and I can literally just solve some issues and you get to feel better. You get to feel productive and it's
Self
okay.
accomplished.
Yeah, right. And it's okay because I think it also reinforces an actual healthy attitude, which is there's certain things you have control of in your life, and there's certain things you don't, and focus on solving the issues you have and fix those, the ones that are in your power, and worry about the other stuff later. It's not always the best, you don't want to build in procrastination, and I know we'll get
No.
into stuff like that, but that's it's that agency that I think is valuable and it's therapeutic, and that's what I want to say is it's escapism can be therapeutic. It's where there are certain instances where people might get caught up in it, and I think what
Yeah.
we're getting ready to transition into that.
Yeah, I think we can segue very nicely right now. Video games are not all just peachy butterflies and rainbows. Like there are some negative sides to it, and I think that's also always been why that question comes up: are video games good or bad? Why parents still today, say to their kids like, "Stop playing video games. Your brain's going to turn into mush," whatever it may be. And sure, there may be some truth to some of that, but I don't expect a 5-year-old to just be playing Fortnite for a 24-hour window. But at the same time, though, their brains are also maybe not as developed as an adult's, so they can't necessarily make those decisions to be like, "Hey, I've played now for 6 hours. I need to go to the bathroom. I need to eat food," or things are going to get more difficult and worse the further this continues. So with that, I think number one, there are some potentials for addictive tendencies. It's tricky to say because this is something relatively new. World Health Organization has only recently, in the past 2 years, declared that gaming disorder is, a form of mental illness and or a type of addiction, really. And this also only impacts a very, very small portion of gamers within the US. They estimate between 1 to, I believe, about 6% at the higher ends. But in other countries, especially in China, it could even be up to about 25%, which is higher. But there also, the criteria is not as black and white as, someone like myself that's all about the numbers. And, it just needs to be 3 plus 3 is 6, and there's no other exceptions. So it may not be as clear right now, and I think we're in a very early stage of learning a lot more about mental health.
Hmm.
But is there anything that you've kind of come across yourself personally that maybe has had a negative impact directly caused from, or rather, video games has caused a negative impact throughout your lifetime?
I think video games contributed to when I was early on not very physically active. And that's one of the things. But you can make this argument about other mediums that are less active as well. I mean, reading.
Hmm.
People consider reading really good because it's, you're intaking information. It became destigmatized, but you're still like when you're reading, for the most part, you're sitting. Although there are, people who might try and read while they're on a treadmill, or now there's audiobooks, so you make that even
Hmm.
easier. But just taking in information. But it's ultimately a sedentary thing, or even TVs, like taking in a documentary. Documentaries can be very educational, but you
Right.
still have to sit there, and unless you don't want to watch the thing and you just listen to it. But video
Yeah.
games, I would say that's probably the most unhealthy part of it, was where I was just super sedentary for a long period of time, and learning how to balance my life so I could get physical activity. And part of that was also self-motivated by I'm like I had low self-esteem. I didn't like how my body looked, and learning how to be able to balance that into the future. But it definitely video games contributed to that, but I wouldn't say video games caused it. It's just video
Yeah.
games feel satisfying, and they're
Filled
designed
that
to feel
gap.
satisfying.
Sounds like they kind of filled that gap. If it wasn't video games, it likely would have been TV, movie, something else in a
Yeah,
similar media.
and it was
Yeah.
a combination. Like early on, like I had cable any place at my parents, my grandparents, etc. So could always watch TV, watched a bunch of cartoons and video games. So it was like I didn't have reasons to play physically as much, especially when I was younger, because I was just focused on like what is giving me the gratification. And I think that is where when you're younger, that can be the trickiest part is, we're driven as animals to seek out satisfaction, and there's multiple ways you can do that. Whether that could be eating, people overeat because eating good food tastes good, um, or
Generally.
yeah, or you're reading a book or you're watching that TV show, and it's stimulating those parts of your brain. And video games do the same thing, and they're slightly more active because they're interactive, even though you're not physically doing that. Though there are, now there's, like Wii Fit, and there's the other types of active games. But yeah, I'd say I don't think it was substituting. It was just it was I didn't understand, and I didn't have the resources with which to be fulfilled through normal physical activity. Whereas video games, it's always very clear cut because it's just imaginary worlds and you do all these crazy things. It's inherently more fascinating than even playing like you know, ping pong. Though now,
Right.
when we started hanging out and stuff like that, like we'd play ping pong for hours, or when we were doing tennis and we made up our own games out there, like we found, and I think that plays into like we also found other people, and that
Right.
social interaction became that satisfaction.
And that's also interesting though, like as far as tennis, we could never actually truly be addicted to it because there were no lights at these courts. So we literally had a hard stop when it was too dark. We could no longer play anymore. So there was a clear path out in a way, which I would say for the most part would also hold true with a lot of other, team sports. Maybe not, I mean, ping pong, certainly, but yeah, as far as video games, TV, movies, inside, as long as you have electricity, you pretty much can engage in any of those activities. Go ahead.
Delving a little deeper into that, also like you were saying, the difference between the activities and how you're getting to the part about the addiction. I think people can still kind of be addicted to the activity, or it's not the, and this is where that nuance comes in that we wanted to get into. The activity itself isn't necessarily what gets people addicted, because as we know from like chemical addiction, that's literally those chemicals create addiction. With video games or even sports, people experience chemical reactions in their brains from the activity. And with video games, because they're designed in a specific way to be entertaining and to have less, I'll say, friction between the player and their goal, they can give you that chemical reaction much more frequently, which like simulates a type of addiction. But you're not putting a chemical into your body, you're just tricking your body into making more of that chemical that you
Sure.
have. And so, like there's kids who throw tantrums.
Endorphins.
Yep. Or like when we're playing a competitive game, say like you're playing Gears of War, or I'm playing like Smash Brothers, and if I do poorly and lose, like all of a sudden I'm like, we get irritable, we get mad, we're not that we're
Mhm.
losing. And then when we're winning, we're like, yeah, this is awesome. And
More, more, more.
yeah, we go through those. And at some point, because we're not getting physically exhausted, we go through what's, I would say, is very similar to like symptoms of withdrawal, because suddenly we're not getting those. That's why like people like to go out on a win, but also people have trouble going out on a win because they want that next hit of dopamine, which is the drug in our brain that makes us feel good. So that's where like it also with physical activity, it's different where it becomes trickier because you can literally become so physically exhausted that
Yeah.
you just literally can't continue the activity. However, I've heard anecdotally like people who like golfing and stuff, like you've heard people love, or I've heard from some friends, you love playing golf at the start because you're not invested. But as soon as you start getting invested in doing well at golf, people can get mad, and then, you want to get back in there and you want to keep playing because you want to do well, and you lose that, you stop getting the same response. And same thing can happen in video games. If you got too good at a video game, you might stop enjoying it because you're not feeling like you're having a challenge. So people could still have a similar experience with even physical stuff, but that's where it becomes, it's mental as well, that we're just
Yeah.
not experiencing fulfillment. Yeah, so Mark, throwing it back to you, in your life, have you ever felt like kind of obsessed with activities? Like for me, example, it's like with fighting games, I practice them a lot to try and get better so I don't feel as bad when I'm playing. So is there any activities in your life where you felt like you might have started to become obsessed? And not that that's the textbook
Sure.
definition of being addicted, but like you started to understand that you were maybe having a problem with an activity because you were taking it too seriously, or you weren't feeling as fulfilled as you wanted to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Overall, like in a general sense, I don't think that video games have ever like impacted my life on a longer scale too. And also this reminds me too, World Health Organization, going back to that real quick, generally they're referencing people that have an addiction for 12 months or longer. So this is not something that, for a weekend someone was playing. But yeah, there's been a handful of times where a new game comes out, everyone's on, all my friends,
Mm.
and I lose half the amount of hours that I should have been sleeping, staying up way too late, and obviously that has direct impact in the following day, and sometimes the following day after that into Sunday, and then as far as Monday going back to work, it has had its impacts. Was years ago. I would say most recently, like I've been doing these daily challenges in Red Dead, and almost forgot to last night, and it was like pretty much midnight. And I was like, "Up before I go to bed, I have to do this because if I don't do it, then my streak ends, and then I lose all this progress that I've made." And I think my streak is up to like 32 days, which is by far the longest stretch I've ever sort of turned on one specific game each day, but also quarantine, so a little bit easier.
Right.
Um,
Oh, is that Red Dead
but
Online or is that something in the
yeah,
single player mode?
yeah, Red Dead Online, they're giving all this. uh, it's like a higher payout each day that you continue that streak.
Gotcha.
It's really silly, but it's more or less they don't give you enough of a payout early on in the game, which is unfortunate. But either way, here we are.
Yeah, let me ask
Um,
this. Let me,
yeah.
because you just made me think of something that's an interesting question. Now, clearly this is something we just need to do research on, but maybe you've heard different stuff. I just realized, I think when I hear about like gaming addiction style stuff, and you hear about the stories of people just that never stop playing the game, I feel like we hear a lot more about that, funny enough, when it's like multiplayer type experiences. Like, Ed shared the documentary IRL in real life, and I'm forgetting the guy's name. I'm really sorry, but look it up on YouTube. And he talks about his World of Warcraft addiction and how he got through it and what was going on in his life, which was a fascinating tale. So I recommend everyone listen to that and watch that. But also like with shooters like Halo or Call of Duty, people are always playing online and they get addicted to experience, or StarCraft. And I assume with StarCraft it's more the online multiplayer experience that people were, they want to go in, they want to beat other people. I don't really remember hearing specifically stories where this guy has played this single player game tons and tons of times. Now, there are people who do like speed runs and try and be or get high scores in games, so there's that those outlets. But have you heard any stories that were like almost to the detriment, were like about someone playing, just getting addicted essentially to the single player experience?
um, Not. That's a good question. I unfortunately haven't heard on one side or another. I think we've all sort of just assumed it's always been multiplayer. That is a good kind of call out because I think at the end of the day, it could be either side. But that I think goes back to at least my own personal beliefs as far as the World Health Organization, the gaming disorder. It's by far the most controversial topic, or from my standpoint again, because there are so many different types of games. There are so many different
Mhm.
ways to play these games on the platform. Like there's so many variables that it's very difficult to just single out one person as like a control to be like, hey, you need to do this task for X number of days in a row for X number of hours each day for that to become a quote unquote addiction.
Right.
I mean, in this past month or so, sometimes I boot up Red Dead and I'm offline in 10 minutes because it was a quick and easy task. Others, maybe I hop on there for an hour or two because I have a little extra time. It's difficult to say.
Yeah, so well, that's kind of, you are playing the multiplayer mode, but you're basically having a single player experience. Or does it those
Yeah,
tasks
for the most
force you
part.
to interact with real people?
Technically, so real quick, there's like I don't know 7 different tasks that you could do each day. Half of them generally are multiplayer focused. 99% of the time, I'm not doing them.
Okay.
You just need to do one task a day to continue your streak. So when I have that extra time, I'll try to do as many as possible. They had a higher payout around Halloween, which feels like almost already a month ago. I was able to get all of those. But yeah, it's you're right. It's a more or less single player experience. I'm not plugging in my headset. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just hopping on there real quick and then probably usually making some dinner.
Okay. And you made me realize something important, so I'm going to pose this question to you with that, because what you just mentioned there, doing your dailies, is a phrase now that's become way
Exactly.
more common. And this
Yes.
is something that's grown thanks to both MMORPGs, which are inherently social and multiplayer, but also with mobile games where it's super easy to go on your phone, log in, do a few minutes of gameplay and get rewards, or even just the daily login bonuses. And while I've avoided most free to play games on my phone outside the occasional Sudoku or Tetris here or there just for funsies, just, to kill some time like we all want to do. I played Final Fantasy Dissidia Opera Omnium. Yes, it's a mouthful, but it was actually a pretty fun RPG. I put about $30 into it ultimately because it was a decent time, but I broke that up as they did story expansions. But I did find myself eventually just kind of logging in, doing the dailies, getting those rewards, etc. And you see that now in more and more games. How do you feel about these activities that are now, and considering your experience with the Red Dead, what's your feeling now on like the ethical nature and the that effect on these daily activities that are just always recurring and kind of trying to draw you back into the game? How do you feel about that for yourself and for like other people?
Yeah, I going back to what you were talking about earlier, chemical releases in your brain, it's 100%, they've done studies like, hey, if we give Mark a sort of in-game like bonus, like, hey, you've accomplished this today, like he will be happy. And I know that. And I know that, but I still will do it because I also enjoy playing the game in general. So bottom line, I think I'm less of a fan, but I'm fully aware so many games nowadays have that. I mean, it's not even just games, it's just there's apps, I mean, I know games or mobile games as well, of course. But just doing these sort of tasks over and over again just to continue a streak, continue those dailies, it's not something I'm particularly crazy about, but it also keeps bringing me back. How
So,
yeah, go ahead.
so do you feel like you're being exploited by those things being there, or do you feel like you have control over stopping them? Because I know we're in a unique situation with quarantine, but where do your thoughts
Yeah,
go on that aspect?
it's definitely something that if I didn't continue my daily streak, it's not the end of the world. I don't really care when it's all said and done with. It's not a big deal. So, saying this right now, I can stop at any point, at least with that daily challenge. It's not
Mhm.
something I'm super crazy about in other games, but because it also, if I just booted the game up to do the things that I want to do, that would be more fun than, oh, well, I could get better payout in those things, but I have to do these dailies first. And that's it's almost like the chore, you got to put away the dishes before you cook any food on the clean dishes.
Now, how do you feel about in terms of other people who might have more addictive tendencies? Now,
Right.
I could say I probably have some addictive tendencies that I've managed to willingly curb over time simply because of wanting to avoid it. And that works a lot with other addictions, like even like cigarette smoking. Not saying it's not difficult, and I've lucky to not been through any sort of chemical dependencies or external chemical dependencies, I should say, because like we said, dopamine's inside your brain, and you can get that from various activities on top of ingesting chemicals from different sources. How do you feel about the ethics of that? Because I'm really torn because it's nice to have those recurring goals. I as a personally get bored of doing the same thing in that I know I'm going to sound really hypocritical because I love doing fighting games. But I guess if it's single player, because the part that makes multiplayer with fighting games fun is that I can fight different people and it's always like different micro experiences.
Hmm.
Whereas with those, the daily quests, they eventually literally can become the same thing over and over, and that just stops becoming interesting to me. But because it's like a check mark on a list, how do you feel about the ethics of that? Do you feel like maybe we need to stop having recurring daily quests because people there are people with less self-control for whatever reason? Or do you think like it's fine and there's like it should be designed in a more ethical way? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I really need to think about that a bit more, but really just
Okay.
real quick, it's something that I feel like in general, sort of this mental health gaming disorder, elephant in the room. I think that needs to be explored a lot more in depth because from what I was reading and kind of the controversy behind that topic alone is that, like I was saying earlier, types of game, how long people are playing and whatnot, it's not as direct and clear as we'd like it to be right now. There are a lot of scientists that are sort of in disagreement, not 100% are on board with this change. With that being said, the common theme that I was gathering was there's a lot of people that believe there's another underlying thing happening, whether it be a mental illness or something else. They're not quite sure what that may be. So whether that we need to have a disclaimer that this video game includes addictive tendency or inducing objectives, dailies, loot boxes, whatever that may be,
Hmm.
I don't know if that's necessarily the right decision right now, but I completely, yeah, I support against that approach for the sake of others' safety. Absolutely. I'm not going to stand here today and say no. We need to just keep these things in here regardless of who's playing them because the user base is more important. But
Now,
yeah,
yeah, and I think there's a difference between like doing the daily quests and loot boxes. I think they're two separate things to talk about. But with like the daily quests or even trophies, because trophies and achievements, they're kind of new and they're kind of like those checklists. Though there's a finite amount and they're not recurring. Do you have any thoughts about, let me ask you straight out. Like me, for me, I really don't care about achievement and trophies. At best, they're a curiosity. I'll look back and see what I unlocked after I've beaten a game, but I don't actively really pursue any unless it's like, unless a specific in-game reward that I'm interested in is tied to it, or if it sounds like it's really fun to do. But where's your current mental stance on how you feel about doing achievements or trophies?
yeah. Well, Gears 5 is by far one of the more popular games I've played in 2020. They have some achievements that are just merely impossible. Like I think over 1 million kills and just re-upping like 100 times, things that I am never going to accomplish if I play the game for the rest of my life practically. So as far as 100%, it was something that I try to do more so on 360. 360 also kind of like promoted that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I feel like achievements on Xbox One have not that them being lost and kind of like downplayed is necessarily a negative thing, but I have no idea what my gamer or my gamer score, right? Yeah, I feel like I haven't said that in
Yeah.
decades because nobody really cares about that, I guess, anymore. Would you agree, or do you feel stronger that you like the trophy system and the Xbox achievements a little bit more?
My opinions kind of fluctuated, and I think part of it was just my personal tendency because I did like at one point really checking things off a list, and I felt like
Right.
that feeling of FOMO by not completing them. But over time, I realized, and also part of it arguing like developers spending any time on achievements doesn't make any sense to me. But through many discussions about it, I find trophies and achievements ultimately harmless. They're superfluous to my experience, but for some people it adds value, and it doesn't really take up that much developer time. So for none of my arguments really hold much water. So I don't think, and since it's a finite list, although people do who are more serious into like getting their achievements and getting all of maximum gamer store and things like with DLC and expansions and all those weird rules that can be frustrating for them, but they are very much like optional objectives that rarely actually result in even an in-game reward. It's just self-satisfaction.
Of
So
course.
that
Yeah.
so that's I guess for me where my line is drawn. I'm like I really don't care, and people can have them if they want them and developers can have them if they want them. But if I think I'd be really upset if a lot of in-game achievements were tied to like in-game rewards. But I guess, I'm willing, depending on what the reward is, I'm more or less willing to do it, so I wouldn't really care. But I guess that's one of those things where, I don't know, I wish if they are going to have it, I wish they add more value, but I guess I'm happy that they're superfluous ultimately to like the gaming experience.
Well, 360 also gave out in-game like avatar cosmetics, right? If you accomplish some achievements.
For some games, yeah, they did experiment with that, and I didn't hate that. It's almost
Yeah.
when I look back at it, it's the same. It doesn't really matter if the achievement existed or not because old games used to have the same thing. Do a specific task, certain way, you unlock a cool thing in the game. Or like with 360, they started having like the 360 avatar items, so that was kind of
Mhm.
outside the game. The only difference is now, like with trophies and achievements, they're public things that you can play a meta game with, so your friends and other people can see how much you've done in a game. And so if you earn a reward based on an achievement, now people understand, like people could see that, and that plays into other aspects of psychology where people, as social animals, we like to be able to show superiority, or we build self-confidence from those
Absolutely.
artificial aspects there. So yeah,
100%.
I don't think they're unethical, although there are people who behave in unhealthy ways because they'll literally play games only to get the highest amount of points. And I think that harkens back to the deeper point is a lot of these bad things aren't caused by video games. It's just enabling. Is enabling the right word, or is it? I think it would be. They're enabling some of the poorer tendencies of the people
Right.
already. They have these
Kind of brings out that negative sort of underlying addiction in a way, right?
Exactly. Like the person already has these tendencies, or there's a problem in their life already, and video games just kind of plays into that. And that's one of the things we read about as well, where it's not necessarily video games causing things, though video games can exacerbate those issues in other situations because of the person habitually enabling themselves through video games. Like, not that it's necessarily, I'm kind of extrapolating from what I read, is that someone with anger issues, if they play a game and they constantly get angry from playing that because they're not doing well, or they're upset from other things, like not getting that satisfaction in real life that they get from video games could cause them to play the video game more. Or also, if they already have anger issues and they play the video game and they start losing a lot, they may end up exploding because it builds up. But it's not that the video game caused that, it's that the person already has an issue that they're not, a real issue that they're not actually dealing with in a healthy way.
Yeah. I I agree. Like the increase in aggression, I think that is something that is a little bit more common, I would say, than the addiction. Or I know we're going to talk about cardiac arrest here in a minute as well,
Mm-hmm.
but the aggression I think is by far probably the most common potential negative. It's something that I've also sort of had experience with, never in a catastrophic way necessarily, but I've noticed, yes, if I'm really in the game playing gears, it's really consuming, and something is trying to distract me, or I'm being reminded of, we need to leave in a little bit, something to that extent. Maybe I need to just kind of take a breath and reset before those next steps. I have also had games though that have made me feel like really anxious and jittery, and like my heart is basically pounding out of my chest.
Yeah.
Rainbow Six Siege, like that was one that I just had to put down. Like I really enjoyed the game, but I was just getting like so like I think it was really just an adrenaline rush at the end of the day,
Yeah.
but so stressed about like I can't be the one on my team that sort of lets everyone else down, and like
Yeah.
so nervous about being that weak link, which is just, it's so silly and goofy. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
video game, like who really cares? But at the same time though, it's like that self pride, I guess. So
So
have you
yeah,
ever sort of had an experience where maybe you're having physical reactions because of how you're playing a game?
oh, very much. I haven't done the classic spike the controller. I think I've done it once when
Same.
I was a kid, and it was
Haven't.
back,
Zero.
yeah, when I was really young. It happened, and I got really mad at one of the video games. It was a tougher video game. I think it was Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo. I got really frustrated, and my mom actually like did a short-term grounding. She's like, "Timeout," and I'm talking like I was like close to like 9 or 10 at this point. But she was like, "Timeout. The game's making you're upset. You need to calm down." And that was one of the first times I realized like how angry. And at the time, I didn't have the perspective to understand just how stupid it was to
Oh yeah.
be that upset. But then, like fighting games, and what I've tried to do with coping with the anger, and there's a little bit of a history of anger with my family, so that's there and on a genetic level. What I try to do to diffuse my anger is try to understand what's causing the anger and solve that issue. So what really frustrates me, like specifically with fighting games, is something being outside of my control, not understanding what is going wrong. I'm way more calm when I can like identify, oh, the wrong I pressed a button and it didn't do what I wanted it to do. Oh, this move has like invincibility here, or my move doesn't have priority here. Like when I can't understand why something is working, it makes me more frustrated. But once I can see it, it's like, oh, because then it's like, oh, okay, solve this problem. You made a bad call here. This doesn't work like that. And I internalize all that information, and then I stop being mad because I stop making bad decisions. But when I don't know why my decision's bad, that's more frustrating. So it's kind of finding ways to diffuse instead of being, that's where my frustration comes from. I think it's more from not understanding why I thought something was right and wrong. And I think people do that in arguments as well. We get emotionally heated from not understanding situations, or being downplayed. But like you were saying with team play, I do put a lot of pressure on myself to play well, and that comes from, it could be external or it could be purely internal, and it could be a slight combination. When we're playing in a social group, we don't, that pressure comes from, we don't want those people we're playing with to stop wanting to play with us because we're bad. And that speaks to like
Yeah.
relationships, and not necessarily that all relationships are like that. But sometimes people can be like that where, well, I don't really want to play with you because you're so bad. Like this is a team game, and if you're this bad, I'm not going to have a good time playing with you. And some people can be flexible. Like what I try to do is when I know I'm going to play a game with people who I'm really good at the game and they're not. Like say Smash Brothers, for example. We've got all
Yeah, I
different
think that's
levels of
a
experience there.
very good example. You are much, much better, and I am horrible at that game.
Yeah, and I don't mean this because I think the game's fun and I understand it takes time to play to get good, and at the same time, and also not everyone's going to invest the same. So I don't want people to feel bad when they're playing, and I just want to be able to have the experience playing with people. So I learned how in Smash Brothers you can do stock where everyone has a certain number of lives, or you can do timed matches where timed matches you just infinitely respawn until the timer runs out, and you just play until whoever gets high score or whatever. And I realized like, okay, if I'm gonna play with someone who's worse than me, let's just play time
You
matches
can
because
say, you can say me.
I mean there's multiple other people and I don't want to single you out, but it would be like
Do not.
we have you and Paul because me and Mike are more experienced in terms
Yes.
of Smash, but also I too get frustrated. Like say we were all playing with items on and I get knocked out within like the first minute of playing just because of I made some bad calls. You guys got really good hits in on me. Some item spawns killed me quick. It's also can be frustrating for me to sit there for the next couple minutes and waiting for you guys to finish out the rest of the fight. So if we play time matches, it's easier for everyone because everyone just gets to keep playing the entire game. Now, if we wanted to take things a little more seriously or whatnot, if we all agreed to it, we could certainly switch to stock. And as long as we're all on the same page, that's fine. Or even with items on or off. I do like playing with items off, but at the same time, I can switch to a mindset where I'm like, you know what? Just goofing off, no pressure. I'd like to win, but it's okay to lose because we're just trying to entertain ourselves. Turning on items, and I don't take things nearly as seriously because there's so much randomness to it.
Right.
It's fruitless to be as serious because you can't control as many variables, and that's
Yeah.
where it can. Sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's an important detail to all of this. Is like there are some games that you can sort of build that handicap within, and I've
Hmm.
also experienced that with FIFA, where it's like, well, rather than playing as my favorite team that I know I can dominate and whip everybody, I'll just play as a weaker team, or take players out and intentionally get some red cards or something to that extent, to just try to level that playing field. Or even, we were talking about ping pong earlier. I'm sure the very first match that you and I played, I may have been playing left-handed because over the years, I've just I was one of the best ping pong players in my high school.
Hmm.
That's basically one of my best accomplishments to my name.
Very cool. Very cool.
But yeah, playing lefty has been a common thing that I've done throughout the years, just to kind of introduce the game to new people.
Oh, sure. And I had some experience with ping pong, so I would have said, no, 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 just play me seriously because I have to get better, and I'm that kind of person who will take the time to get better, and I might get frustrated, but ultimately I'm having fun and I know I can get better. Now, not ev and that's I think that's the point I was trying to get at is there's attitudes. So on my point, I could be putting that pressure on myself, and maybe my friends will not care, and they're just having fun. But there's some people who do have that issue, and will go like, I'm no longer having fun because you're so bad. So I'm either A, going to avoid playing with you, or I'm A, going to avoid playing that game. And
Yeah,
that's the kind of experience I want to avoid. And like I said, there's
absolutely.
all sorts of different people and it's different things. And some people are capable of doing like what I did, which is you switch. Okay, I'm playing with friends who aren't as good as me, so I'm not putting as much mental stake in this, and we're just enjoying the experience of playing together. But then there's other friends where it feels like, I'll say as it feels like because it's not necessarily 100% vented. I haven't talked to everyone about this because some people you don't bring it up with, and other people you do. But it could also be where they are more competitive and you can tell like they stop having fun and they just get frustrated, and then that makes it frustrating to play with them, and it becomes less is even though I can enjoy and have fun even losing because I'm like, all right, next game, whatever. And we've mentioned this casually, but we'll state it out. These are just video games. It is entertainment. It's not like life-saving surgery. It's not going to fix the economy. We're just
Right.
trying to kill some time, and at
Hang
worst,
out.
by ourselves, and at best, we're hanging out with friends, spending some quality time especially when we can't be physically together and do other things like that. So
Of course.
it's always sad when, people can't adapt a mindset to have some fun when things aren't there, or when people, and it's disappointing not necessarily of those people, but it also can be disappointing when people just can't be on the same page about these entertainment experiences, and it affects the relationship in a negative way because either because of people not being flexible.
Yeah, I think that's the important takeaway. It's important to kind of get on level playing ground with everybody. But maybe more importantly, at the end of the day, you just need to get good, right?
You need to get
I
good at losing.
Yeah, maybe
That's what
that.
we all need. We all need to stop rage hating and just kind of be like, all right. And
Maybe
I
that's
speak as someone who, like I said, I get angry, and I've been working on it, and I get like images of like wanting to smash my TV or controllers, and luckily I can control those impulses, but it doesn't make it feel any better to be that angry.
sure.
And it sucks. Uh,
I've never gotten that from you, and not to put you on the spotlight
sure.
here, but yeah, like I know when the four of us were playing Mario Tennis last winter when we were all able to get together, and like we really were getting into a rhythm, and like these matches were getting a bit more heated. I think everyone was so quiet and just like focused and zeroed in on trying to
Hmm.
beat the other team. And there was a moment that sure, things could have gotten a little heated, but we're all just having fun. We're playing freaking
Right.
tennis, and it's a ludicrous game as it is. But yeah, it certainly had that potential. But I think at the end of the day, we were just really trying to have that fun.
Right. There's only two times when in our tennis, once I was actually good enough to understand the game, that I actually get angry. One is like I was saying before, where I don't understand why something didn't work. Like I remember when I was accidentally doing trick shots a ton of times.
Yeah, I do remember that.
No
Yep.
idea. And then finally we figured out it's like, oh, you're double
Yeah,
tapping and
if
that's
you're
a
double. Yep.
it's a shortcut for a trick shot. I'm like, oh, I gotta stop doing that. So
Right.
there's that. And of course there's obviously some jank in the game. Sometimes the physics wonk out and either it hits, does a body shot, or the ball gets past someone and you're like, what the heck? Oh well. You
Yeah.
get over it. Those like I get mad if I mess up an input or I don't understand why I mess up. And then two, when Mike plays PD Piranha. That's about it. Those are about the only two reasons I get mad.
Shots fired.
And I mean, we obviously we've talked about like those big giant characters. Like
Oh
PD
yeah.
Piranha is just insanely huge and makes it unfun to play
Yeah.
against that. Uh,
Character ban.
but yeah, but otherwise I've done a lot to curb my own attitude because ultimately I want to keep playing with people and I want to be able to give us all a fun experience
Of
with
course.
those things.
So talking about fun experiences, earlier we were starting talking about some of the cons with
Yeah.
video gaming in general. You were talking initially, one of the things that you had highlighted when you were younger, you were playing for a little bit longer of a period of time. Do you know how long your longest play session for gaming in one sitting has ever been?
Oof. I know, like, if we're gonna count it as one sitting, got to make that exclamation point for like getting up and going to the bathroom or maybe grabbing a
Well, yeah,
snack.
yeah. I mean, as long as it's not like I would say 30 minutes or less of a break.
Sure, sure, yeah. Just stating that out loud because I the longest I've played, it's been a long time. I think definitely with it's either my longest session was either sitting with like Game Boy and Pokemon, because I could play that for hours back in the day, and I did like so much. Like I wasn't min maxing, but I was using cheat codes and I was catching all the Pokemon. And I at one point for one of the series of games, I think it was Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and just to say like that's how to give people a scope of how big the Pokedex was at the time. I went through every single Pokemon and mapped out exactly what moves I wanted to give them, and then I game sharked to give them all exactly the moves I wanted. So I spent a lot of time both like writing that stuff down and then also gaming and doing the codes. So something either somewhere around there with Pokemon, or definitely when I started playing Witcher 3, I don't want to say addicted because I feel like that's being facetious and disingenuous to the topic we're at hand, but
Sure.
definitely with like I have a good story with Witcher 3 where at one point I started playing in the evening and I was playing, and like I look at my watch, and I'm watching me my cell phone, but looking at the time, I'm like, oh, it's like 1 a.m. You know what? I'll do like two more missions, And then I look and it's like 2 a.m. Ah, you know what? I can do this one more. And then all of a sudden,
One more game.
yeah, I'm sitting and I start hearing birds chirping. I'm like, why the heck are
Oh my
birds
god.
chirping at like 2 in the morning? And I look out the window and it starts being like you just started seeing light coming back through, and the sky's that like really dark blue. And I'm like, wait a
Hmm.
second. And I look at my phone and it's 5 a.m. I'm like, oh crap! I've been like, I
Wow.
just didn't stop playing. I literally lost track of time and my eyes were even hurting. And I like, okay, save, shut down, and went to bed. And that was probably a super long. That was unintentional, not
Yeah.
counting like some of my younger days where I might have had like a friend sleep over and we literally tried to stay up as
Sure.
long as we could because it's what you do as a kid.
So what would you say? Like 10 hours, you think, for The Witcher?
Ooh, yeah. That would definitely be probably not 10, probably closer somewhere between like 7 to 9 hours.
Okay.
'Cause I definitely did not move much, but it was like
Which
7 to 9 hours is probably the longest I've gone in like a dedicated sitting
yeah.
of gaming. Now, although even in my adult days, I've taken off a few days to play some video games, used my time, made sure I was caught up with work, etc., being responsible in case anyone
Of
wants to
course.
accuse me of otherwise.
Hey, you got PTO, use it.
Yeah. But even then, like in my adult, when I have a whole day to play a game, I might total close to 12 hours, or not, I wouldn't say 12 hours. It'd still be like 7 to 9 because I will get up, I will sleep in, I will
Yeah.
get up, I will eat, I will take care of myself like an adult, and I will play as much as I can, and but I won't go crazy, and I'll get up and I'll stretch and stuff like that. So I'm much more responsible, even though I may still play over, like what is it? You're supposed to get like 8 hours of sleep, so it'll be like 16 hours are left over.
Yeah.
So I might actually play for like 7 to 10 on
Yeah.
those while spacing it out over, the whole day.
I agree. There's more and more over the last couple of years, like for the big games that like I've just been so invested. Like Gears 5, I took the day off. It failed miserably at launch. Like that's another day's story.
Yeah.
But I've never actually like taken that day off and then just, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, that's all of my time. Because it just tends to be, all right, well, I gotta get breakfast and I gotta just do these dishes here and one thing leads to another. The max that I absolutely know to the decimal point. I played for exactly 6 hours, Battlefield 3, many years back. I think it was just
Mm.
after college. I know for a fact that I played 6 hours. Like it was a very, very long play session. Would definitely have probably done it again. I think we had a full squad of like four guys, like pretty
Mm.
much the whole evening. But it just, I don't know. I think I played until almost midnight or later and had completely skipped through dinner, which is really what like messed me up then for the next day because then it was all right. Stop what you're doing, take care of yourself, do everything that you need to do that you've kind of pushed back. But
Mm.
then by the time I went to bed, now we're looking at probably 2 a.m., which nowadays is much later than it was maybe 10 years ago. But yeah, 6 hours in a day's session or even maybe like a weekend, maybe I've hit 10 or a little bit over that. But again, I've wanted to hundreds of times, but when it comes to practicality and how often I actually do it, it's certainly been far and few between.
We should mention that actually the long stints aren't necessarily the problem because what happens is, and as we were talking with mental health and addiction, is the habitual nature of playing a game overindulgent. So if like say you do manage to do your day job and then you go home, but then all you do when you get home is like you might eat junk food, you sit and munch while you're playing games and like, you're spending let's say 3 to 5 hours a night playing
Yeah,
a game and that's it. You don't do any physical exercise, you don't do any of the other stuff. You some people their hygiene gets sacrificed as well. That's where it becomes an issue and it's really just the video game is just kind of a substitution and distraction from responsibilities, but that it's not necessarily the game that causes that. It's just that the game, as I've been saying before, it gives people the satisfaction that they're not getting out of life, and you're gonna do what makes you feel good. That's where it becomes a problem. Is like people become too obsessed with the game, and personally, I believe outside of like actual clinical issues, there's an issue with self-awareness, and I think that's a big societal problem
absolutely. Hmm.
because we have a stigmatization of being wrong in our culture. And we're in the United States, so the American culture it's getting better because we're getting rid of ideas about like gender roles, toxic masculinity, or even toxic femininity is probably a thing. And those ideals that we had before and not being emotional, and we're starting as a culture to evolve out of suppressing so much conversation that I think one of the core things is just this lack of self-awareness, and people have a hard time getting out of issues because they refuse to accept how much control and how much of the issues are stemming from them. And there is a give and take, obviously, because there still is a situation where you can't control how other people are going to react to the things you will do or say necessarily, but you can at least control how you present yourself to try and elicit the intended reaction that you want from them or position yourself in a better, understandable way. So that's where I think where some of this comes from is people start blaming a video game, and I think a lot of it comes from, oh, well, we'll blame the thing because that's clearly there and they didn't act like this beforehand. But honestly, it's from the people around them or the person themselves, like they just aren't doing it. Because like you've obviously done a lot of things, and you were talking about off the podcast where you took like a very big technical break and just did stuff around the house, trying to get summer chores out of the
Yeah.
way,
Hmm.
and then kind of just disconnected, and you felt super great. And for me, like the stress, I've been more inside, and I'm living in an apartment, so it's not necessarily a big deal with outside chores. I don't really have outside responsibilities, but I haven't been able to exercise the same way I have. I also had some health issues that are resolving now, so I can get back into exercising more, but I can still play 4 to 5 hours a day, and I'm still taking care of myself. I eat well. I get some mild exercise. I am not. I wouldn't say like I'm not supremely depressed. It's a tough situation out there, and I have some anxiety. If anything, anxiety is the worst part. But there's not much you can do about that other than distract yourself because the world just has to take care of itself. Like I can't control. I'm not
Right.
making the vaccine. I'm there's not really other preventative measures I can do right now other than not go out, social distance when I have to, and wear my mask every time it's appropriate. So using the video games and also I work and I do my job and I get through that and I manage that responsibility and I take my work very seriously in terms of my work ethic. So all of that is managed and it's really also from understanding that I don't get myself into a loop where like oh man you have those days work sucks I just want to play the video game. It's like yeah I realize that, but it's also like okay if I don't do my job then I'm gonna not have money and I'm not gonna be able to support my hobby. So you know what, take a few deep breaths, relax, take like a 5 minute, 10 minute break, reset, go back in, get it done, or creating balance and being productive. Or ultimately,
Just do it.
yeah. Or even if I take like a little break or something, I'm like, you know what? And I'm lucky enough to work from home, is so I can spend a few hours after beyond my clock and I can get work done and I can do work that I know I'm like, well, I don't need to talk to anyone to do this. I can just do it. And sometimes I've deliberately done that even when it's not from lack of productivity. It's a matter of I really don't want to be distracted during this, so I'll save it until after hours because I know I won't get any emails, I won't get any phone calls, and I can just do it for like 2 hours at my own pace and I can get the work done. And it's, I'm lucky enough to have the flexibility to do that. So that's where, I'd say some of this stems from there's a issue of self-awareness, and I take a lot of responsibility for that. And I think people have a responsibility for some of this when it comes to mental health. So I think with like the physical activity,
Mhm.
that's where back when I was younger, I really didn't understand any of this. I didn't have perspective. I didn't have experience to understand what I should be doing. And once I'm older with all the information, etc., I've gotten to that. And I think that's a hard part for like teaching kids. And I get that where like I don't have a problem with kids playing video games, but now being an adult, I'm like, yeah, no, I think there's a healthy balance. So steering towards that with physical activity, what are your thoughts on like the right way to balance it? Because like we said, video games aren't bad. It's just a matter of balancing it. So what were your thoughts about
Yeah,
gaming and physical activity?
it's a tightrope. I think at the end of the day, assuming somebody is being responsible, it's a case by case. It's not like you need X number of physical activity to then do X number of video games for a set period of days or whatever it may be. It's not even close to being as black and white like that. But generally, if you live a healthier and good, have a good diet, healthy lifestyle, you're likely going to be able to commit more time and whatnot to, just hobbies in general, whether that includes video games or
Right.
not. So I live a mostly healthy lifestyle. I had a couple minor injuries this past summer, so as far as like running and whatnot, it's something that I really want to get back into. It's just a matter of whether or not my body is going to be ready for it. I feel it by not sort of exercising maybe as much as I always have traditionally during the summertime with soccer. That here we are, heading into the colder months of winter. That yeah, that's something I need to be a little bit more aware of, and maybe not just default to all right, day's over. Let's see who's online and play this game or that game. So it's something that's been a theme much more recently, of course.
Now, do you feel like you were ever like a video game was making you neglect those other things like subconsciously, or do you feel like you've always willingly, like whenever you put yourself in those long haul gaming situations, you were doing it very willingly. It wasn't necessarily a distraction from responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic. So I tend to be, I think I am a very organized kind of, I like structure, that kind of schedule. So I'm the type that will literally do as many chores as possible to then be like, hey, now I have all this free time that I can play video games. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I now have a 6 hour window, but granted, I'll probably only play for a couple hours.
Hmm.
But I always, 99% of the time will take those responsibilities, make sure everything is in order. If it's a really nice day, take advantage of that, do the outside chores
Hmm.
before the sun goes down to then, hey, now I can play video games because it's dark out. I really have nothing else that I could do. And I'm physically tired. So I I definitely though would say I've missed like hanging out with people or just like been late probably to events in the past directly caused from video games. Nothing substantial. It's not like, oh, you're 3 hours late for something. No, I'm talking. All right, well, maybe I didn't sign off in enough time, so then I really was rushing and very anxious to get somewhere, and maybe it
Hmm.
was 5 or 10 minutes later than I could have been. That's definitely had been a common thing. Right now, it's not really an issue. But yeah, I mean, besides that, maybe not getting to dinner as early and kind of pushing things back. That's probably happened a little bit, but nothing major where, granted I also we don't have any children. So as far as responsibilities, Scooter will certainly start speaking up when he's very hungry.
Right,
Uh
pets.
as it, as it, yes, my dog Scooter, as it's become a more and more reoccurring theme lately where it's 6 o'clock and he just does his high pitched barks and wants dinner ASAP or it's the end of the world.
Yeah, and I think it can't be understated how you and I are basically in very privileged positions, or we're lucky that we didn't have what seems to be like predispositions to some of the bad habits that we're talking about here with mental illness. And I'm more on the side of where I've had some mental illness, have some mental illness that I've been managing and successfully have been managing over the years. And there are other people who have it much worse, and it's difficult. So we're not necessarily the best people to talk about it, but as like
Of
we are
course. Yeah.
concerned, and that's what we were getting at, kind of like we've talked about loot boxes in the past, and we were talking about the trophies and addiction. So do you think, as like a general statement, that we'll talk about like the dailies again? Do you think like those kind of activities in games should things that could be more or less qualified as like deliberately addictive elements of game design? Do you think they should be outright banned just to not have them there because they are trying to tap into those parts of our brain that crave that vapid satisfaction? Or do you think it should be something more like a setting or like a, I mean, there's obviously you could do parental controls for children because that's a whole different thing. You're dealing with
Mhm.
developing people when it comes to kids, and that's a whole other argument, and where you can wean kids on and off of things and teach them experiences. But for like adults or people who don't necessarily have the support structure to, have someone there to guide them and curb them, like, do, what are your thoughts on game design in general of like things that might be considered addictive?
Yeah, I don't really see that disappearing. I mean, I really
But do you think
loot
it should
box.
like be outlawed? Like, what's your opinion if you had to say? Would you advocate for them to be outlawed,
Um,
or what would you advocate for?
I would advocate for allowing the developers to have creative freedom. They may get more attention. I know, like I think I'm in the minority. I think loot boxes are an added benefit to gaming. Video games have been at that $60 price range for quite some time. So to get a little bit of an added income, they've, had these microtransactions, these downloadable content pieces, these loot boxes that are sort of in a way a gamble. But without them, these developers are not getting as much money that could potentially allow them to get a little bit more creative and have the same bandwidth of personnel to create these other extra stories. So I tend to fall into the boat of, if you want to support a game, support it. If you really enjoy it, support it. Give money back, because a $60 price tag is not the final price that it needs to be. Or if you get it on Game Pass or discounted in some form or fashion.
Mm.
So I know I tend to be on the minority with that, but yeah, I would rather allow the control of the developers rather than you have to do this or that, or you can't do this. Do you
I
disagree?
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. Like I love the take you're giving right now because I really want to delve into it. But that's more specifically is what we're gonna delve into with the upcoming episode that Ed will be leading, which is talking about monetization in video games, both like the
Mhm.
recent price changes because of next gen, as well as delving into our feelings and thoughts on subscription models, DLC, loot boxes, etc. So I'm gonna just summarize my basic feelings right now, not necessarily reacting exactly to what you said,
Yeah, we can give
because
a
there's
quick little teaser.
yeah, because there's so much to get into it. I'm not opposed to additional monetization. There's a fine line, and I think it has to do a lot with ethics. So I think loot boxes are bad. I don't think we should have loot boxes. A la carte is better, but there's also an argument to be said about even charging for having microtransactions rather than like video game expansions. That there should be a distinction between those two. So that's where I stand when it comes to that. Expansion's good, DLC okay, but it should be bigger level stuff, and also there's more we can go into. But loot boxes, randomized, which is kind of gambling, no, we don't need those. And I think it's fair to say that that should just be outlawed and not allowed in video games anymore. Because there are other ways to monetize that are much more ethical than the way video games are, or loot boxes in video games are handled, and that includes the mobile game space. And I understand that's with the free to play and that's another aspect wrinkle is free to play games. How do you handle that? So that's something to get in there. But when it comes to, I would say with like monetization schemes, I think it would make much more sense to put like a limit on how much you're allowed to spend in microtransactions for certain things. Because people with addictive tendencies or gambling tendencies, they should be especially if they're an adult, there's literally no one to stop them, and then eventually they just get themselves into a bad situation, and they can't even always stop
Yeah.
themselves from getting into those games. I get there's personal responsibility. You can't force people to take personal responsibility until they've literally like affected their community. Like, if someone was like stealing money from a convenience store in order to be able to pay for their Ultimate Team's card packs in FIFA. Like that's a thing where outside intervention will naturally come into play, and you'll start
Yeah,
seeing stuff. But otherwise,
that would be quite the news story.
if that guy literally just stops spending money on groceries, because
Right.
that there's
Yeah,
a much
that's
bigger discussion there. Or with kids who don't understand all the stuff that's in it. Like I think it would be if we have to make a compromise, in which case the companies have to put limits or should be forced to put limits because it's not that they're not I'm not allowing them to make additional money or there's other things. It's that there are people out there who literally can't control themselves, and what are we doing? Are we just saying it's okay to exploit people who have issues? And that's where that gets into, and that's what we're talking about here is, are we just allowing capitalism to exploit people with issues, or can we draw reasonable lines and say companies like, hey, guess what? It's just because it's the right thing to do. You're not allowed to make infinite dollars. That's just
yeah.
not how it works. That's a personal belief I have. So you're not allowed to have infinite dollars. But also like curbing addictive tendencies in games. Like games in and of themselves, like I said, are inherently about satisfaction, which is where addictive tendencies come from. So I suppose saying I don't know with the daily quests. I'd be willing to hear different arguments on that, but I feel like maybe that'd be something you're allowed to turn off. Like, hey, this game features daily quest information. It's like I have a
Well, no one's
disclaimer. Would you like to
forcing
turn
you
these
though.
off? But it's not about being forced. It's that once it's there,
That
it
added
becomes
incentive.
it becomes in your it just gets stuck in their mind. That's where the addictive tendency come from for some people. But at the same time, there are people who don't have that self-awareness, or once they get into that compulsory feeling, they can't fight it. They literally don't understand it, and they literally aren't able to stop it because they feel like they don't want to, rather than rationalizing that they shouldn't. And that's the other thing. Like, we're speaking as people who have a little bit more self-control because we don't have as bad a condition as other people. There are people
So
who's
more, maybe more of a severe condition.
right. It's like severe OCD literally impacts people to the point that they just it's compulsory. They just do these behaviors, and they literally can't feel normal or satisfied unless they do that stuff. So that's where
Yeah.
I'm saying, even it's not about they're optional. Like you're just saying, the daily quests are inherently optional. It's because they exist at all, and now that the person knows it exists, their choices either become I have to do them, or I just don't play the game. Like, they just can't, there is no middle ground. So I'm in favor of having a discussion for middle grounds where maybe just turning them off, or possibly even saying, because like they're so superfluous, they're not really adding value. It's fake value. And you could argue that all video games are fake value, but that's a discussion we could have here is, is there anything in games like that are there that's like you feel like the way I do about like trophies and achievements? Like, it's cool that it's there, but it really doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that for a minute, but like the story, that's definitely something that, if you play a game that has a very captivating story, that's definitely something that, you can keep and cherish for years down the road.
Hmm.
Whether you have 1,000 or $2,000 worth of gold in a game, like, yeah, that's not really something that's going to live on, and you're going to take that and tell your grandchildren about it.
Sure. But is it really, like, to use a more explicit example, and I don't know if the quests are like this, but I'm making an educated guess. Like in Red Dead, you're going on there. Do you really think, would you really have a problem if I told you you're not allowed to have a daily quest where you have to go get 5 animal pelts? Like, no, you're just not allowed to put that in as a daily quest anymore. like,
Yeah.
like you're not gonna miss that.
No, no, not at all. I would just rather them fix the payout so, we can actually make decent money, and that's sort of the root of the problem at all, is just the developers have put in this platform that, yeah, you can pay premium, or you can pay real dollars to get this premium currency in game to then open the floodgates for all this extra stuff. But the way they get you is, well, you can do these dailies and it'll increase your payout at higher percentages. So
Oh, okay. So you saying that also goes back to the other point, which is we want more ethical, fair monetization, and that's for another episode. But that's also where it comes into, because it can play into mental health, where people with their gambling or addictive tendencies might spend a bunch of money to do that. So it's there's a whole much bigger discussion to be had there on. But you'd be open to other design options. So is it fair for me to take that away in your opinion? Take that away from your opinion?
I put that back at the developers. Let them do what they want to do. But would I prefer it not be in there in the first place? Sure, but I guess that kind of goes back to the get good. Make good games.
Right. And what I'm trying to get at is, I think there's ethical decisions and rules that we should be making. It's not necessarily going to curb their creativity because we're just taking away things. Because way back in the day, we didn't have microtransactions. You had to unlock stuff, games released, and they were what they were. Very rarely might they have been reshipped out because there was something that was a supreme bug. But,
Yeah.
we
Well,
talk
there were no
anecdote.
patches either.
Exactly. Other than like re-releasing the cartridges, like, or the CDs, like you literally had to reprint them and hope the other stuff went out of circulation or did refunds. Not refunds, but or yes, refunds plus like
A recall, maybe.
exchange recalls, yeah, and do exchange policies. And you had to hope people heard about it and would do it. If not, then yeah, the game was just bad and it never sold, and the developers would have to choose. Developers and publishers would have to choose whether or not they even make another sequel or something like that. So yeah, that's a thing there, and that's where some of this, I think, is the ethics of, okay, so we're limiting their design decisions, but they're creative people. So in my belief, ultimately, we're not really limiting their creativity, and sometimes it is, once again, anecdotally said, creativity comes from restrictions. So I think there's a fair balance that can be struck, but I will err on the side of the consumer good and the consumer mental health and being preventative because that's like this, and I feel bad about saying this, but there is a little bit of truth to a slippery slope because, and we've seen it, and that's what I lie back on. We've seen it. Businesses will screw over the consumer as much as possible to make a buck, and that's where I'm saying I think it's fair we can draw a line, so they're legally not allowed to do that, and we need to be thinking about that as well.
Yeah. It's something I think overall it's definitely something that's shifting in the industry. Video games have absolutely sort of exploded in just these last what 2 3 years. The whole Fortnite effect, Battlefront 2 with their whole debacle, which still continues to this day with microtransactions and just how that whole shift is happening and playing out. So it's far from over. This is absolutely just the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, as more studies are being done on gamers, as more attention, and as this industry continues to evolve. So I'd love to revisit this topic in the future, probably a couple years down the road, as we sort of learn a little bit more and get some more recent studies. But were there any other final thoughts on your end? I know we kind of talked through some of our own personal
Yeah.
experiences with some of the pros, some of the negatives. But is there anything else that we're missing?
Yeah, a few more points. I do want to pose another question for you as well, because I just realized something while we were talking. In the realm of the physical activity. Now, VR units are a newer thing that are engaging, and we're getting to better full room scale VR tech. So that's actually increasing the amount of ways that digital entertainment can also be physical, but also going back to something a little more simpler, like with the Wii, the Wii and Wii Bowling, Wii Sports, all that, and to some extent the Wii U, which carried that on, and a few of the Switch games, but not so much. But there is like Ring Fit Adventure, and then there was like that's been a popular craze like that, gamification of exercising and things like that. But I wanted to ask about a specific point. How did you feel about, and I don't know how much you experienced this, but I think you're aware of it, on the Wii, especially for like Wii Sports, and I think and it might have been built-in system notification. How did you feel about like there being a system level thing that could like maybe give you a reminder every like hour, half an hour? Sometimes it's software specific, it might have been hardware level, where the system would literally like pause and go, "Hey, you've been gaming for so long. Maybe you want to get up and take a stretch." How do you feel about those messages in terms of, managing gamers stuff? Do you think it's the responsibility of the developers and game publishers or hardware developers to like insert that stuff to help for people with that? Is it just a nice option, or do you think that should just be a personal responsibility thing?
Yeah, I think that it couldn't hurt. It definitely seems like also that that is the way that the direction is going. There's so many more parental controls and just hourly breakdowns. I know Xbox allows parents to more or less ban what types of games they aren't allowed to play and sort of
Hmm.
approve what games they can play. So I don't see why not. I definitely have an option to toggle that back and forth. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's cool. I was wondering if maybe for certain people, like we were talking about, where they have much more severe conditions and they need some external intervention in order to help properly manage it. I wonder if that'd be something like maybe there would be a system in the future where they could custom order and be able to say, hey, put this feature on the system and
Mm.
I can't toggle it off, or like an internet, there could be an account thing. So when you order it through like, let's say Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft and be like, hey, I need my system to block all microtransactions. Hey, I need my system to block all daily quests from these games. Things like that maybe that could strike the balance where a user could make that selection, and that way when the games come, that stuff's blocked for them. But then for other people, like for us, where yeah, you could play a few dailies and you'll stop and it's fine and it's just there. But then for other people who don't, so maybe that's something in the future we'll get more, and we just have to raise attention for it in our society that these are issues. But then we also have to have rules in place for that. And I know we're not exactly in agreement on this, but I think there is some regulation that requires in order to require businesses to have responsibility for these things, where also I don't downplay there is a certain amount of personal responsibility that needs to, but there is a distinction that needs to be made between like what we're saying today, legitimate mental health concerns where a person is compulsory or instinctively drawn to certain behaviors, versus someone who's intentionally or just because it's not that they're incapable, it's literally because they just have issues they're not addressing. So I think those are two different things. Because you can have self-awareness and be in a bad situation. Like I had depression and I became self-aware and I was driven to get better. And there are people who are much more severely depressed than I was, and that are driven to get better, but the condition can get so bad that that drive becomes inconsistent, and that's not them. It's just the condition affects their brain. So there's that. Yeah, we were focused on mental health. I don't want to downplay like that physical accessibility is something, and we are all luckily like able individuals. So I don't know if we'll eventually talk about something like that, but just a quick shout out to like Microsoft's efforts with their accessibility controller from Xbox One, and that's carrying over to Xbox Series X and Series S. The series, the new Xbox
Yeah.
Series consoles. So that's cool there. We're talking about the monetization in a future episode as well, and we'll delve into that and the ethics. But yeah, I think I just want to say like, yeah, with gaming, I think with mental health, gaming doesn't necessarily cause bad mental health. It can exacerbate certain symptoms and conditions because of the way games are designed. I think you could make some rules to prevent games from being so exploitative of people with these conditions. But in general, I think games can often provide a lot of therapeutic effects based on that. There's a lot of science, or in the science is growing on what can be positive effects, but there can be some negative effects. But I think it's a misnomer that gaming's cause this. They can It's just like anything else. Like you can exacerbate an issue with mistreatment of a tool rather than it being the exact cause of it.
Yeah, I would certainly say, I think it's been a reoccurring theme throughout the conversation today is the positives far outweigh the negatives if there are so many.
Right, and there can always be new research, and there are some things that could definitely be negative. Not absolving them completely. I think it's more tilted towards they're tools. The games are tools, and people can use them in good and bad ways. And I think that's more the truth to it. And if with proper management, we can have a lot of positive benefits. But definitely, people need to take responsibility. Businesses should take responsibility for not exploiting people. Yeah, and we'll definitely keep an eye out for other research in the future, and we'll revisit this topic as necessary. And, we might do some of our like general news topics and things like that. But yeah, this is definitely a fun conversation. This was definitely a fascinating conversation today, Mark. I'm glad that
Yes.
you advocated for this topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's an important topic to talk about. It's something that exists within video gaming, regardless if it's something we want to think about. It's an important one. So happy that we can connect and talk about some of our own experiences, whether they be positive or negative.
Yep. And before we sign off, I do want to call out the article I was referencing a lot of and read before this that I found was from gamedesigning.org. The article was titled "Why Video Games Can Be Good for You," and the reason why I read this article was because after looking through it, they did cite many different legitimate studies and reputable sources. I will put the link for this article in the description. And then Mark referenced the World
Yeah.
Health Organization, so Mark will provide me links for those, and I'll put those in the description as well for any articles he wants there. And then we just encourage everyone, if you're curious about mental health, obviously look after yourselves and take care and seek professional help. We're certainly not professionals in any way, shape, or form. We're just avid video game enthusiasts. And look up perspectives from other people who are talking more about mental illness and gaming and those effects, and learn from those people who are actually suffering from these and their perspectives, and actively seek out that information to see, because we take for granted having more stable brains or having better coping mechanisms that prevent us from being exploited as much, where there are people who are less lucky and legitimately suffer not because of their own volition, and they are more likely to be exploited, because those are the people we should be looking out for, because the tables could always be turned on us someday and there might be something else that we can be exploited for. So have a little bit of self-awareness. Also take care, have some sympathy and empathy for the people around you, because we're all in this together. I think that's a lesson that in these times we really do need to learn, is there's been so much unnecessary controversy in our world. So with that, Mark, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Nope.
All right then. This was fantastic. I'm not really going to give a hint to what the next episode is because honestly, not sure. We're gonna figure that out. But yeah, look forward to getting this episode up. And thank you everyone again for joining us today. Mark, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And take care, everyone. Until the next time.
Bye.